You're looking for a spare battery on a Sunday afternoon and end up, the way you always end up, in the kitchen drawer that technically holds batteries, but actually holds a small, dense archive of your entire relationship with not having enough expired coupons for a grocery chain that closed 2 years ago, 3 different loyalty cards for gas stations you don't use anymore, a folded flyer for a sale that ended in March. None of it thrown away, all of it kept on the theory that you might need it someday. You find the battery eventually, underneath a rubber band ball you also don't remember starting. You don't
Don't throw the drawer's contents out.
You never do. You close it the way you always close it, telling yourself you'll deal with it later. And you go back to whatever you were doing, and it doesn't occur to you, not this time either, that a drawer full of expired discounts you'll never use is doing something more specific than just being cluttered. You grew up in a house where a coupon that expired unused felt like a real physical loss, the kind your mother would mention out loud, mildly, the way people mention things that actually cost them something. You're 34 now, with a stable teaching salary and a savings account that would have looked like science fiction to the kid who used to watch her clip inserts out of the Sunday paper at the kitchen table. The drawer hasn't caught up to the salary yet. Neither, it turns out, have several other things you haven't thought to examine closely until a specific Sunday afternoon spent looking for a battery turns into something closer to an audit. Your colleague Farah Delgado, who teaches the classroom next to yours, spends most of her planning period on a Tuesday clipping and organising digital coupons across 4 different grocery apps, a genuinely impressive system that saves her, by her own careful accounting, about $34 a week. You've watched her do this for 3 years and always assumed it was just a hobby, a specific kind of satisfaction some people get from beating a system at its own game. What you noticed this particular Tuesday, mostly because you're paying closer attention than usual after the draw, is what she isn't doing while she's doing this. She mentioned last month, in passing, that she's never once compared the 2 retirement plan options the district offers, that she just picked whichever one sounded more familiar the day she was hired 6 years ago and hasn't looked at it since. The gap between the 2 plans, you find out later, after actually reading the district's own comparison sheet yourself, works out to something in the range of $60,000 in projected retirement savings by the time either of you would actually retire, a number so much larger than $34 a week that it barely belongs in the same conversation. A study you come across that same week about how scarcity affects attention rather than just money describes something researchers call tunneling. When resources feel tight, the mind narrows sharply onto whatever immediate solvable problem is directly in front of it, at the cost of noticing larger, slower problems sitting just outside the tunnel's edge. It isn't about intelligence or effort. People who are legitimately under financial pressure get measurably worse, in lab conditions, at planning for anything outside the tunnel, because the tunnel is where the actual emergency lives, and the brain allocates its attention accordingly. You don't say any of this to Farah. There's no version of that conversation that doesn't sound like an insult dressed up as a favor. What you do, quietly, is finally read your own retirement comparison sheet that night, the one you'd also never fully looked at, and find you'd made almost the identical mistake 6 years ago for almost the identical reason. Not because you were bad with money, but because the $34 a week problem in front of you had always felt more urgent than the $60,000 problem you couldn't actually see. You switch your own plan the following morning, a form that takes 4 minutes to submit, retroactive only from that point forward, no way to recover the 6 years already spent in the weaker option. You don't tell Farah about any of it, not because you're keeping a secret, but because there's no natural moment in a Tuesday planning period for that particular sentence, and you're not sure yet it's your sentence to say to her at all. You stop at the gas station on your way home that same week, the way you do most days, and buy a coffee and a scratch-off ticket, $4 total, a small ritual you've had since college that you've never really examined because it's never felt like it costs anything meaningful, just $4, the kind of amount that doesn't register as a real financial decision at all. The cashier, a man named Nikolai Reyes, who's worked this same register for as long as you've been buying tickets from him, mentions, half joking, that he sees the same faces every single day, buying the same small amount, and that he sometimes wonders what all of it adds up to over a year for any one person, himself included, since he buys one most mornings before his shift starts too. You do the math in the car before you even pull out of the lot, mostly out of the same instinct that made you read the retirement sheet a few nights earlier. $4 a day, 5 days a week, comes to just over $1,000 a year. Run through even a modest, unremarkable rate of return over 20 years instead of spent at the register each morning. That same $1,000 a year becomes something in the neighborhood of $55,000, not because you did anything clever with it, just because you didn't spend it the moment it existed. This is the second sign, and it isn't really about the coffee or the ticket at all. It's about a specific, well-documented pull towards small, certain, immediate rewards over larger, uncertain, delayed ones. A pull that researchers call present bias, and that shows up more strongly, more or less universally, in people whose early lives taught them that a reward deferred is a reward that might simply never arrive. You didn't grow up trusting that the future version of a dollar would actually be there when you needed it. $4 now, guaranteed, small as it is, has always felt more real to you than $55,000 2 decades away, a number so abstract it barely registers as a real consequence of anything. You don't quit the coffee, you do stop buying the ticket. Not out of any dramatic willpower, just because seeing the actual 20-year number made the $4 feel different in your hand than it did the week before. Your friend Celestine O'Byer, a loan officer at the credit union you've used for years, mentioned something over lunch that catches you off guard, mostly because it's about you specifically rather than a general observation. Shed pulled up your account balances the week before to help you with an unrelated question about a car loan, and noticed, professionally rather than nosily, that you're sitting on $41,000 in a checking account earning essentially nothing, an amount that's been slowly climbing for 4 years without ever moving anywhere else. You tell her it's your emergency fund, said with the specific confidence of someone repeating a phrase they've used many times without examining it closely. She asks, gently, how you arrived at $41,000 as the right number, and you don't actually have an answer beyond a vague sense that more has always felt safer than less, a feeling that's never had an upper bound attached to it. She pulls up something on her own laptop, a simple chart showing what $41,000 sitting in a zero-interest account has actually done over the last 4 years, once inflation is factored in. Not grown, not stayed flat, but lost roughly $4,600 in real purchasing power, quietly, the whole time you were adding to it and feeling more secure with every deposit. The number on the screen never went down. What it could actually buy did, the entire time, invisibly, in a direction that felt like safety and was actually a slow, steady loss dressed up as caution. This is the third sign, and it's the hardest one to see from the inside, because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like exactly the opposite, like the responsible thing, the thing your mother would have approved of, more money sitting untouched where nothing can take it from you. Growing up without enough teaches a very specific lesson about cash, that having it, visibly, in an amount you can see and count, is the entire definition of safety. It doesn't teach the second half of the lesson, the one about what stagnant cash quietly does to itself while it's sitting there being safe. You move $30,000 of it into an actual investment account that same week, keeping enough in checking to cover 6 real months of expenses, a number Celestine helps you calculate honestly instead of guessing at. It takes you 3 separate sittings to actually click confirm on the transfer. Some part of you is certain, the whole time, that you're about to need every single dollar of it back the moment it leaves the account you can see. Celestine mentions, once the transfer is finally done, that she sees this exact pattern constantly, almost exclusively among clients who grew up with real financial instability, a specific reluctance to let money out of visual range, even when leaving it in place, is quietly costing them something every single month. The clients who grew up with money, she says, tend to have the opposite problem entirely. They invest too aggressively, too early, without enough of a cushion, because they've never once had to feel what it's like to actually need cash on a specific Tuesday and not have it. Neither instinct is really about math. Both are about which version of running out you were taught, as a kid, to be afraid of first. You've been tutoring 3 students privately after school for 2 years. A modest side income you charge $30 an hour for, a number you picked when you started and have never once revisited. The same way you'd never revisited the retirement plan or the checking account balance until this particular month made you start looking at everything at once. Your union rep, a man named Tobias Amaro, mentions in passing at a meeting that the district's own approved rate sheet for private tutoring in your specific subject and grade level sits at $58 an hour, nearly double what you're actually charging, a fact that had simply never come up because nobody had ever asked you what you charge, and you'd never once volunteered it or checked it against anything. You ask him, half defensively, whether raising it would just mean losing the families you currently work with, an assumption you realize, saying it out loud, you've never actually tested. He tells you flatly that 2 of the 3 families you tutor also use a colleague of his at a different school who charges $55 and has a wait list, which means the market's already told you something you never asked it. This is the fourth sign, and it's the one that took you the longest to name correctly because it doesn't look like fear from the inside. It looks like modesty, or gratitude, or not wanting to seem greedy. Underneath it is something closer to zero-sum thinking, a quiet, inherited belief that any gain for you has to come directly out of someone else's pocket, that asking for more automatically means taking something away from a family who's already stretched thin, rather than simply charging what the actual market has already decided your specific time is worth. Growing up in a house where money genuinely was zero-sum, where a dollar spent on one thing was a dollar that couldn't go toward another, teaches that lesson so early and so thoroughly that it doesn't feel like a belief anymore by adulthood. It feels like a fact about how the world works. You raise your rate to $50 the following month, a number that splits the difference and still feels, even at that, like something you have to apologize for in the email. None of the three families says a word about it beyond confirming the new invoice amount. You mention this to Tobias a few weeks later, half expecting him to say something about how the increase should have gone even further, and instead, he tells you something that sticks with you longer than the number itself. That the actual hardest part of that whole email, for almost every teacher he's ever talked through this with, was never the number. It was the sentence right before the number, the one where you have to state plainly that your time is worth more than you'd previously been charging for it, without softening it into an apology first. You go back and reread the email you sent. You deleted the apology on your third draft, right before sending it, though you don't fully remember deciding to. You sit down that same week to do the boring annual audit you've started running now, the same 11 to 18-minute Sunday habit that started with a battery drawer and somehow became a real practice, and you count, for the first time, how many separate insurance policies you're actually paying for. Home, auto, an extended warranty you somehow never fully let go of on a laptop, a separate accident policy sold to you at the gym 2 years ago, a pet insurance plan for a cat who's never once been sick, and a life insurance policy sized at an amount that, doing the actual math, exceeds what anyone in your life would plausibly need if something happened to you. You call the agent who sold you the life insurance policy, a woman named Rosalind Farrow, mostly to ask a clarifying question about the death benefit, and she's the one who actually flags the mismatch, unprompted, in a way that surprises you given that flagging it costs her a commission. Most people in your situation, no dependents, no mortgage co-signer, don't need coverage this large, she says. I sold it to you because you asked for it at that level. I probably should have asked more questions at the time about why. The why, sitting with it afterward, isn't complicated once you're actually looking for it. A household that grew up genuinely one bad month away from real trouble develops an almost bottomless appetite for insurance against every conceivable version of that feeling happening again. An appetite that doesn't self-limit the way a purely rational calculation would, because the feeling being insured against was never really about the specific risk on the policy. It was about the general, diffuse dread of being caught unprotected again. A dread no reasonably priced policy can actually fully extinguish, which is exactly why it's possible to keep buying more of it indefinitely without ever quite feeling done. You drop the accident policy from the gym entirely. Reduce the life insurance to a figure Rosalind helps you calculate against your actual, current obligations, and let the extended warranty lapse the same way you'd already let the dishwasher one lapse months earlier. The combined savings come to $94 a month, not a dramatic number on its own. But the fifth sign was never really about the dollar amount. It was about noticing that you'd built an entire quiet architecture around a fear that stopped matching your actual life years before you noticed. You clean out the kitchen drawer on a Sunday a few weeks later, the same drawer where all of this technically started, and you throw away the expired coupons, the loyalty cards for gas stations you don't use, the flyer for a sale that ended in March. It takes you 11 minutes. You keep the actual batteries and nothing else. Nothing about your salary changed over these few weeks. Nothing about your childhood changed either. Your mother still clipped those coupons for reasons that were completely rational at the time, given what she actually had to work with, and none of what you've moved, cancelled, or renegotiated is a judgment against any of that. The math that made sense for her in that kitchen with that budget simply stopped being the math that applies to yours, sometime in the years between then and now, without anyone ever formally telling either of you the rules had changed. You think about Farah, still clipping her digital coupons next door, and you don't say anything to her about any of it. The same way nobody said anything to you. Some things only make sense to hear once you're already the kind of person who's started looking. You think about the $4, the $41,000 that was quietly shrinking, The tutoring rate you never said out loud, the sixth policy nobody asked you to carry, 5 separate signs, and every single one of them made perfect sense the day it was formed and stopped making sense years before you noticed. The specific and unglamorous lag between when a lesson gets learned and when it gets updated. You call your mother that same evening, mostly just to check in, and near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, you mention the drawer, half joking, that you finally cleaned it out. She laughs, says she still has one just like it, and you don't push the conversation any further than that. There's no version of this call where you explain compounding interest to a woman who kept her family fed through years you don't fully remember using nothing but a coupon binder and a very good memory for which store had eggs on sale that week. Whatever she built with what she had, it worked. It got you here, to a kitchen of your own, with a drawer that's finally, for the first time, just batteries. You still don't know whether you've caught all of it. There's probably a sixth thing, a seventh, sitting somewhere in a different drawer you haven't opened yet. What you do know, closing this one for good, is that you're no longer the kind of person who keeps something just because throwing it away once felt like a risk you couldn't afford to take.